Welcome to the Animal Wellness Podcast, all about improving the lives of animals with better policies and practices in government and business. Brought to you by Animal Wellness Action, where we believe helping animals helps us all. Here's your host, Joseph Grove.
Greetings and Happy New Year, everyone. I'm Joseph Grove. In early 24, a video surfaced that shocked the country. A wolf was run down by a snowmobile in western Wyoming, brought into a bar, tormented, and ultimately killed. The man at the center of that video is Cody Roberts, a resident of the small town of Daniel, Wyoming. The case ignited national and international outrage, exposed glaring gaps in state wildlife law, and raised an uncomfortable question. What does Wyoming's treatment of wolves say about our values, about cruelty, accountability, and coexistence with wildlife? Today, that case is no longer just a viral moment. Cody Roberts has been criminally charged, has pleaded not guilty, and now faces a legal process that could help determine whether extreme cruelty toward a wild animal will finally be taken seriously in a state where wolves remain deeply polarizing. But the legal case is only part of the story. How is this prosecution being received inside Wyoming? Is the backlash louder than the calls for justice? Or vice versa? And what does the Cody Roberts case reveal about the broader cultural and political attitude toward wolves in a state where they are still widely feared, loathed, and politically targeted? To help us understand what's happening on the ground, we're joined by Mark Heinz, the outdoors and wildlife reporter for Cowboy State Daily. Mark has covered wildlife conflicts in Wyoming, Idaho, and Montana for decades, writing extensively about wolves, grizzlies, mustangs, and the deep tensions that surround them. Today, we'll talk with Mark about the status of the Cody Roberts case, the reaction in Daniel and across Wyoming, and whether this moment represents a turning point or just another flash of outrage in a long war over wolves. Mark, I'm so glad you're with us. Thanks for joining the show.
Oh, thanks for hosting me.
Help our listeners understand a little bit about what Wyoming is, what it's like, right? It's a very little populated state. I've never been there. I would imagine 90% of our listeners have never been there. Give us a little bit of a feel for what it's like to live in Wyoming.
When it comes to kind of the rural frontier mentality, Idaho is Montana light and Montana is Wyoming light. So in other words, the three states do share a common culture, very much so, but it's probably most pronounced in Wyoming. And just for the reasons you stated, we are out of those three states, we are the most isolated. We have the smallest population. The closest thing we have to a large urban center is Cheyenne, which is maybe 60,000 people now. You really have to want to live here. It's not an easy place to live. I mean, the weather sometimes is not the greatest. Of course, there's the isolation, lack of services. Because they like it. They like being left alone. They like living the way they want to live. And very much a mentality of, I will mind your own business. I will mind my own business. Please return the favor. That sort of thing. So, I think it's a great place to live. But of course, I grew up in Montana and then spent many years in Idaho. Very independent people that just want to do what they do. And mostly, hey, I'm guilty as charged as well. But people just mostly big thing. They just want to be left alone.
We're here to talk about the Cody Roberts case and your perspective as a journalist on the scene. You've written many stories about Cody Roberts, but also the broader issue of wolves. Wolves are a big subject area for us here at Animal Wellness Action. We care deeply about them. Our founder and president, Wayne Pacelli, is incredibly emotionally invested in the animals. And we've had other shows and even webinars on wolves. So we'll talk about both the specifics of the Cody Roberts case and then maybe the status of wolves generally in your state. So you've covered wolves in Wyoming for a long time. In all those years, how unusual or unprecedented is the level of national attention and legal scrutiny surrounding the Cody Roberts case?
I would say it's above and beyond. It's unprecedented. I mean, definitely there's nothing really new here in terms of the substance and the lines have been drawing and lines that have been drawn in the two polarized sides that might be butting heads over the topic. The last time there was that one wolf, and you're going to have to forgive me, I forget the number that she went by, but she was a very well-known wolf that I think strayed out of the park and got killed. I believe she was shot by a hunter in Wyoming, and that would have been sometime, I think, in the 2010s. That was a big deal, but even that pales in comparison to what's happened with the Cody Roberts case. And, when I saw that, when I did my own reporting, I mean, I knew that, once the story became apparent what it actually was, and once the video was released, it was a no-brainer that it was going to be big, that it was going to, elicit a lot of strong reactions one way or the other. But, when my email box blew up with messages, not only from folks, across the region and across the country, but really around the world, that's when I realized, like, wow, this is big. This is so, yeah, out of all the big deals over wolves, I think it would be fair to say this has been the biggest.
When we first ran a social media post, I believe we did, about the case, we were very surprised, in a pleasant way, that people had a heart for this wolf and the set of facts surrounding her demise. And I wouldn't be surprised if you and the other people on the editorial team of the journalism team of the Cowboy State Daily were surprised as well. I wouldn't be surprised if that were the case. And as I mentioned, I come from a background of journalism, and these stories, I mean, they just, you get a sense that this is going to be really big, and there's an excitement relative to it, notwithstanding the grimness of the facts themselves. So we were blown away by it. It sounds like you were pretty surprised too. Now, give me a feel, Mark, please, for what the story has done to people in the various communities or the state. I know you have people who are probably very much on the, hang the guy, right? No punishment too severe. But he also has, I think, a great number of supporters. I saw a photo in your paper. Cody Roberts' name was on a banner, and he was being lauded. It's like brother against brother almost. Is there a civil war over this?
I think certainly to a degree. I mean, if you boil it, you parse it right down to the community of Daniel itself. I've had conversations with people on both sides. I mean, so, some of them have had to have been off the record because it is such a, huge emotional and potentially a nuclear issue, especially there at the epicenter of it. But yeah, you have people even in Daniel that, really don't like what happened. And, they feel that Cody Roberts, through his actions, brought complete shame on their community, and they hate that fact. And then you have people on the other side that are kind of, Cody Roberts is kind of the vehicle through which they, from their perspective, they're sticking it to the man. They don't like, the federal government, trying to control their lives or what they feel as they see it foisting these wolves upon them. They certainly don't want out of state, much less out of country interests trying to tell them how to run their business or, run their community or live their lives. And so, putting up a Cody Roberts banner, welcome to Cody Roberts days. That's maybe kind of their way of their way of showing some defiance and sticking their thumb in the eye of what they see as a power structure that's lined up against them because of this highly emotional incident. So again, even there in Daniel, you have the two different sides. And then of course that radiates out across the state. There's a lot of folks, I think there's some nuance. I mean, there's a lot of folks who maybe don't necessarily have a problem with wolves being hunted. They just think the way that particular incident allegedly went down, like the methods that were used and how it was done, and the animal allowed to live and suffer for a prolonged period was just, in their opinion, that just violates every ethic of hunting and makes hunters look like, troglodytes. And of course they hate that. And I think there's a lot of people that are just like, hey, we've talked about this enough. Can we move on? I think there's some of that as well. They're like, we've done this. We passed a law. we've got the guy dragged into court now. Can we just be done with it and move on? I think there's some fatigue over the whole thing as well. So you kind of have all those different emotions mixed in a pot here in Wyoming.
Very few states have the kind of weather, at least the ones I've been to and have lived in, that accommodates snowmobile usage. So it seems bizarre to this warm weather guy that a snowmobile would be used in this way. How common is the practice? We refer to it as whacking or thumping of running down an animal with a snowmobile. Does that happen often in Wyoming?
Anecdotally, I don't have any way to quantify that. Anecdotally, I've heard that it's fairly common, probably more common with people running down coyotes than wolves. But as far as are there big troops of people going out and doing it every weekend? I haven't seen any evidence of that, but I think that, maybe because of the scrutiny, and really the negativity associated with it now, maybe some people have backed out on it, but, I think it was, relatively common, but again, I just heard anecdotally from people that said, oh yeah, I know folks that do that every weekend, but this is Wyoming. There's not very many people to begin with. So how many people is a lot of people?
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. You can have very few people and that comprise a fairly significant part of the population. What is, to your knowledge right now, Mark, the status of the case? A trial date has been set, I believe, in the spring, April or May, if I recall. What is happening while trial looms on the horizon?
Well, a better person, since the case or the topic has really moved out of the direct realm of wildlife and moved into the realm of courts. Our crime and courts reporter, Claire McFarland, has kind of taken up the torch. So she'd be better to ask about the nuts and bolts specifics about that. But to my knowledge, it is still, he and his attorney did file a not guilty. They pleaded not guilty. As far as I can tell, they're sticking by that and they're ready and willing to take it to trial. So, indications are at this point that it will go to trial, but I don't do crime in courts now. I've done plenty of it in my past, as I'm sure you have. And so I'm sure as anybody who's done that beat knows that things can turn on a dime. Parties can change their mind at the last minute. And so will it go to trial? That remains an open question, but at least from what we know coming from the parties at this point, both the prosecutor and the defense seem determined that they both have good cases and that they do seem determined that they're going to take this to trial. So, we'll see.
If it does go to trial, would you expect national media to start booking hotel rooms in Daniel or wherever the trial is being held?
Absolutely. I don't, that's the other thing. This story has maintained, it's kept momentum. I mean, of course, it's not at an absolute fever pitch that it was, when you're talking throughout the entire year of 2024. It was pretty much all anybody could talk about. I think that has died down, but I think if and when they actually take it to trial, I would agree that it's probably going to ramp back, the national and international media machine will probably ramp back up.
Yeah. I've actually thought about proposing to, my bosses that, Ryan, our producer, and I go out to Daniel, and it seems to me, pardon my recollection, I don't know if the venue was changed for the trial, but let's call it Daniel, to try and cover it directly. I think that would be fascinating. And a question that is also interesting is which side stands to gain more and to lose more, regardless of the outcome? Will the wolf advocates appreciate their day to make their case? Will their cause be set back if Mr. Roberts is found not guilty? Or will the hunting lobby, let's group those people in the pro-Cody people, let's call them pro-hunting group, although I'm not sure people on the anti-Cody side are anti-hunting, but for nomenclature, let's just call them pro-hunters, whether they would feel that the guilty verdict somehow would enable momentum for more wolf protections in the state. What say you to that dilemma?
I think you nailed it. I think both of those sides, as well as many people with a spectrum of opinions that kind of sit between those two bookends, will be watching this trial. Like if the trial goes forward, they will be watching it like a hawk. And I think you're correct. I think, especially the people with, deep, passionate views on either side do have a lot invested in the the outcome, because you're right. The outcome has, implications either way, regardless of, whether you think it could lead to, more liberalizing or a kind of a green lighting, even more aggressive methods of wolf hunting or lethal wolf control. Or if you're on the other side and you're concerned that, it will lead to more restrictive protections for wolves, that could lead to less lethal control and less hunting.
So, Mark, you mentioned a minute ago a new law or a law had been passed since the Cody Roberts episode. What is the status of wolf protections in the state now, if there are any?
Well, Wyoming's, it can be a bit confusing because we don't have just one wolf policy for the entire state. So the law that you were referencing, what was, colloquially called the Clean Kill Bill, which basically doesn't ban the use of snowmobiles or other vehicles to pursue or even run down, predatory animals. But it does designate that if someone hits an animal or by whatever means they take the animal, they have to kill it quickly and humanely. They can't. It addresses the one part of the incident that really ticked a lot of people off on all sides was the fact that the animal, at least from what we know, was allowed to suffer over a prolonged period of time. And so that law addressed that. If you're going to kill something, you have to kill it quickly. Now, dialing back to the status of wolves in Wyoming, most of Yellowstone National Park is in Wyoming. Within the boundaries of the park, wolves are completely protected. They cannot be hunted at all. Then you have what they call the trophy hunting zone, which is adjacent to the park, which also includes most of the prime habitat where most of the wolves live. And that's called the trophy hunting zone. And there's hunting there, but it's regulated. There's set seasons. There's set bag limits. You have to buy a license. You have to go through the process as you would to hunt any animal. And you have to be licensed hunting within the hunting season and according to bag limits. And then outside of that, and people, people say 85% of the state, it's basically a free fire zone where wolves are classified as a predatory animal, no different than, say, coyotes or jackrabbits, where they can be pretty much killed by any means, anytime, no license, no bag limit. If you see one, you can take it out. And so that's the status. That hasn't changed. None of that has changed. It'd be because of what happened with the Cody Roberts case. That was the status before, and it remains so today.
The antipathy toward wolves, how strong is that in the state? Is it kind of a universal within Wyoming parameters phenomenon where people just detest these animals, or are there folks who see them less villainously?
I'll go all the way back to, my very first days, after graduating college in the 90s, early 90s, and really even further back than that, just working at the school newspaper in college and having discussions and debates about wolves when it was still a hypothetical, when the reintroduction program was still just a concept. It hadn't even been done. And I'm hearing the same arguments on both sides now that I heard back then, what is that, 35 years ago or more. As far as universal, I think people might be surprised about how nuanced a lot of opinions are. Even a lot of people who don't necessarily like wolves or really would have wanted them here if they had a choice have accepted the fact that they are here. They're more or less okay with them being here. They want, the mantra you will hear coming from them is they need to be managed. You need to allow us to hunt them and control their numbers and kind of keep their don't let them just disperse all across the state, because in some people's, point of view, there's just most of Wyoming isn't suitable wolf habitat because of the as they see it, the inevitable conflicts that would result. For example, having a pack of wolves out by Torrington, people would say that's just not realistic. That wouldn't work. You do have, again, the loudest voices are always those on the extremes. You do have those that are, the only good wolf is a dead wolf, smoke a pack a day. I hate them, shoot, shovel, shut up. Yeah. I mean, those voices have always been there. They always were. And I imagine they always will be. And on the other side, you have people who were, and again, I'm not talking, stereotypical person who moved out here from California. There are people who were born and raised in Wyoming who were like, they love the wolves and they want them here. And they're like, why do you guys have to go out and shoot wolves? Why are you doing that? So I would say there's a fairly good mixture of opinions. And I think there is a lot more nuance to people's opinions on either side, than most folks might realize just looking at it from the outside. It's not so clearly cut and dried as, oh, I'm pro-wolf or I'm anti-wolf. I think there's a lot of nuance in between. It's like, yeah, I'm pro-wolf, or I really wish wolves weren't here, but they are. So how do we deal with them? So, I know that's kind of a long-winded, explanation on my part, but it's just, there's a mix.
You're listening to the Animal Wellness Podcast. We'll be right back after this quick word from our sponsor.
This is Wayne Pacelli with Animal Wellness Action. We depend on countless people like you to support our fight for animals. Join us today by donating to further our campaigns to spare countless animals from cruel and needless pharmaceutical tests. Put an end to animal fighting. Liberate farm animals from extreme confinement, and so many others. Become a donor at any amount. Visit animalwellnessaction.org/donate to join our fight against animal cruelty of all kinds. That's animalwellnessaction.org/donate. Thank you.
Now, back to the Animal Wellness Podcast.
I'm going to state for you some of the arguments we might make if we were given a full page space on the Cowboy State Daily. A case to make to critics of wolves. One, wolf populations help control the spread of chronic wasting disease among deer and other such animals. Wolves also predate on coyotes, which numerically and statistically otherwise are far more injurious to farmers and their interests. Wolves also help mitigate vehicle deer collisions by helping control the deer population. What do you think the average wolf critic might say in response to those arguments in favor of wolves as they countered against them?
They might say, look at the elk numbers. Overall elk numbers are increasing in, Colorado, Wyoming, Idaho, Montana, supposedly are neck deep in elk, but they would point to specific areas where the elk numbers have really been knocked back. And in their mind, in their opinion, the elk are just more valuable than the wolves. That's what the people want. That's what the people have put their time, money, and effort toward conserving. And so they resent the fact that the wolves are taking out so many elk and deer and those sorts of things. And then, they might say on the coyotes and ranchers thing, again, I can't really speak for other people, but they might say a loss of your livestock is a loss of your livestock. It doesn't, who cares which critter is doing it? In fact, they might argue, even if the wolves get rid of the coyotes, they might be better at taking out my cows or my horses or my sheep than the coyotes ever could be. Again, I can't really put up my own opinion or my own spin on it. Those are just some of the things that people might say. And again, some people might say, okay, wolves are fine right around Yellowstone and right outside the park in that mountainous area there. Cool. Again, they might say, we wish they weren't here, but there they are. We're going to deal with them. We're going to have to live with them. But again, as I mentioned before, you start talking about a pack of wolves, even out here by Riverton where I am, much less over in Torrington or, Glen Rock or, down by Laramie. Or up by Buffalo or wherever else in Wyoming. They just go, there's just there's too much conflict for them. They'd hit the game herds too hard. They'd be too much trouble for ranchers. They themselves would be running out on the interstate and getting run over. So, again, whether those arguments hold merit, that's up to you to decide, but those might be some of the things that you'd hear.
Mr. Pacelli, my boss, Wayne, would wag his finger if I didn't throw in 2 additional pro-wolf arguments.
Oh, sure.
One of them being that a fair amount of tourism dollars come into Wyoming so that people can experience wolves, photograph them, see them in the wild. And another would be that the elimination of some wolves destabilizes those wolf populations to the point where more juvenile wolves are likely to initiate wolf-human encounters, which humans are generally opposed to. And you may not have anything else to say in terms of representing as best you can the anti-wolf argument on those 2 fronts, but I know that those would be 2 other reasons to protect the animals: the tourism dollars they bring in, and the fact that destabilizing the populations can cause more human-wolf interactions.
Sure, and again, just anecdotally, some of the things I've seen other people write or heard other people say, they would say, oh yeah, tourism is great. That's what we have the parks for. That's what Grand Teton and Yellowstone are for. That's where the wolves are. That's where they told us they were going to be. That's where they told us they were going to stay. So cool. Have all the wolves you want in Grand Teton and Yellowstone. Just keep them out of the rest of our state. As far as the second thing people might say, I've heard people say, well, wolves only live 4 or 5 years. Most wolves only live 4 or 5 years in the wild anyway. Wolves die. They can get be trying to hunt and get kicked in the head by an elk and die. There can be pack on. The wolf competition with other wolves can lead to fights that oftentimes are lethal to wolves. So. Again, right, good, bad, or indifferent, the argument that person would make is, what difference does it make if, one of the dominant animals in a wolf pack is killed by getting stomped by an elk, or killed in a fight with another wolf pack, or shot by a hunter? Dead is dead. Well, the wolves still have to deal with losses regardless. And so again, the answer might be, what difference does it make?
Our perspective in mind, we would say to those people, and I'll state here just for our audience, that the introduction of one more malevolent player is one more malevolent player when it comes to the wolf pack destabilization. And I don't hear you arguing against that central premise, but I would throw that in that argument, that hatred for wolves where it's found in the communities where it's found, or the families, is more of an inherited thing. We pick it up from our parents, and their parents may have hated wolves. Or do you think that as people become adults and do whatever they may do in the state, wherever they may live in the state, come across this antipathy on their own? Is it generational, or is it to some degree learned when it comes to wolf hatred?
Man, I think it could be both. There might be somebody who was more or less neutral. Maybe they had a dog they really loved that got mauled and killed by wolves. Maybe they just lost their 4th or 5th calf, and if folks are saying wolves are barely a drop in the bucket when it comes to losses to the livestock industry, but that person would say, well, it's more than a drop in a bucket on my ranch. So some of it might come from experience, and some of it, like as you argued, some of it might be cultural. I remember attending a lecture a long time ago. I think it was even the legendary Mark Buscino that gave it. He was giving some background on that, and he said, one thing that was, of course, you had, if you're talking about white folks, going back to Europe, you have the long history of conflict with wolves on the continent before they even came to America, which kind of had embedded a negative attitude toward wolves. And then he would say that a lot of times on the trail, when people would perish on the trail on these long journeys across, to get to where they were going, wolves would show up and start eating the corpses of their loved ones, so that just really reinforced. I mean, what a god awful thing to think, my goodness, my uncle died. Now the wolves are eating his body. Of course, the wolves were just, they found a food source and that they took advantage of it. But, So those sorts of things, you're right, can get really culturally or generationally embedded. And so the attitude just passes down through the generations. And of course, the other phenomenon, the other elephant in the room, and I've had people tell me this in person, they'd say, if they had just let the darn things, they were starting to come back on their own anyway. We're starting to get a few filtering in from Canada anyway into Montana, and they eventually would have made it here. If they'd have let them come here on their own, we still wouldn't be wild about it, but it wouldn't be that big of a deal. Where the deep resentment comes from is, again, this is whether perception is right, wrong, or indifferent. The perception is that the federal government, the feds and the environmentalists force this on us. The wolves kind of migrating back in on their own wasn't enough for them. So they grabbed a bunch and they artificially restarted this process right in our backyard. So I think some of the new, again, you have the deep historical conflict with wolves, like wolves eating your uncle's corpse on the Oregon Trail, that sort of thing. And then you have this newer resentment that is because the darn government and the darn environmentalists came in and forced this thing on us. And so that's where the new wave of resentment toward wolves is coming from. It's not even so much the animals themselves. It's what they symbolize.
Interesting, because you allude to a phenomenon I don't see where I live, which is in Kentucky, southern Indiana, the Louisville metropolitan area. And that is perhaps a really strong sense of state autonomy. If something happens to Kentucky or Indiana or Illinois, we're all together, lots of people, we cross back and forth, and we don't have a strong, or at least I don't think most people around me do, have a strong state identity. But it sounds like people out in this more rugged area, what to me is almost still, reminiscent of a frontier mentality, they have that kind of leave us alone outside world. We're in Wyoming or Montana or Idaho. We don't need left coast liberals or, Eastern Seaboard government officials telling us what to do. Is that kind of what I'm hearing you describe?
Yeah. It's a resentment towards, what is perceived to be powerful outsiders who they decided for us that we were going to have wolves. And, again, whether the good, bad, or indifferent, that is a perception.
If you were writing this story 10 years from now, what would you hope the ending looks like?
Well, again, as a news reporter, it's not my job to hope one way or the other. It's just to report the news. As far as like looking into a crystal ball 10 years from now, I think the same conflicts and the same arguments will still exist. They might have gotten a little bit less pronounced and a little less sharp. Like maybe by then people might have found, I don't think the opinions on the extremes are ever going to change, but maybe more people might have found, some ground in the middle where they could meet and agree on at least some things. And probably, there's going to be people that, again, perceive the Cody Roberts incident as, indicative of a cultural sickness, that is widespread and deeply rooted. And there's going to be some people, I think even 10 years from now, are just going to say, you know what, that was a one-off incident. That was one person doing something terrible that does not reflect our values. And so again, yeah, it would be interesting to go 10 years in the future and see if people are still looking at it through those same lenses and maybe a little bit pointing the finger at each other over it.
How likely is it for, are you called Wyomingites? What is someone who lives in Wyoming? How likely is it for a Wyomingite to see a wolf? The average person living in your state, how often or if ever will they see a wolf in their day-to-day activities?
Depending on where you are, almost never. I've seen a grand total of one. I've been in Wyoming since 2004. I've seen one wolf. Other people, who kind of live or work or spend a lot of time in wolf habitat or established wolf habitat or on the periphery of it, are probably going to see wolves on a frequent basis. It depends on where you are and what you're doing.
My wife and I vacationed in Florida last year, took a tour of NASA, And they had told us before we got onto the bus that we might see an alligator in the wild. And we actually did. One was sunning himself or herself along the roadway. And it was just the most extraordinary thing to see this animal, which, like a wolf, has somewhat of a mythical status in its natural environment. So I would say if I were in Wyoming,
this is hardly anything new to me. I mean, I'm going back to, 87, 88, 89, when I was in college, having discussions in debate in the university newspaper newsroom over should we bring wolves back, and if we do, what's it going to look like, and what are the positives, what are the negatives. And I've covered a lot of, pretty much all stripes of wildlife. I don't think that there's an animal that evokes as strong as emotions and as visceral reactions as wolves. I mean, maybe the only thing that comes close is grizzly bears. But, and one thing I kind of say jokingly is even people who don't like grizzly bears still like grizzly bears. Grizzlies are kind of their own thing. And I think it's worth noting, I mentioned earlier, the perception that wolves were foisted by the government, whereas grizzlies were allowed to come back naturally. The protection was placed on them in the 70s, and then they were allowed to come back naturally. There isn't that perception that they were forced on people, although there is a growing chorus of voices that are saying, okay, we have enough grizzlies now, let's delist them and start hunting them. But that's a whole other, ball of wax. But again, even the grizzlies, I'm not sure what it is about wolves. Again, if it goes all the way back hundreds and thousands of years to our European roots, for those of us that are, of that ancestry, or, what it is. But yeah, wolves, whether positive or negative or anything in between, just wolves evoke really strong reactions in people. They are a hot topic. I've seen them be a hot topic for almost 35 years, and I don't think it's going away anytime soon. I think they're going to remain a very hot, very emotionally charged topic.
Thank you for listening to the Animal Wellness Podcast. Please be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and follow Animal Wellness Action on Facebook, X, Instagram, and LinkedIn. To stay current with all of our news and information, and to take action to help animals, sign up at animalwellnessaction.org. Until next time, remember, helping animals helps us all.